Oh, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's GRIDtalk. I'm delighted to be joined by Human as well from the APM. I don't know, Human, do you want to quick say hello?
Good to see you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Human, Association for Project Management. Very much looking forward to this event, Pip, and thank you so much for inviting us.
Cool. No, it's our pleasure. So for this session, we wanted to focus on some of the kind of challenges that people face when they're trying to build their project management capability. I'll just do a quick run through. So for those that are new to GRIDtalk, GRIDtalk is something that we run at Method Grid. We do it monthly, and mainly it's focused on just sharing best practice, some of the research, and sometimes we'll do when we do major releases to the platform, we'll also do run a short event for that. The next one that we're running is October's event. It's on the 22nd of October. So Tom's online. He'll be putting the link in the chat. We released, I think last week, the first release of source grounding into the platform. So this allows you to ground or source ground the AI within the platform. So if you have all your policies, processes, and standards, you can add those to the platform, and then the platform will then help you translate that into a playbook, but it'll be source grounded. Source grounds the language model on your resources. And the main reason to do that is to quickly help clients translate all the kind of shelfware and help them move it into a digital platform as quickly as possible, but making sure it still is relevant to kind of your way of working, your standards, and your process. So I think Jody will be running that with Mark. So please, if you want to sign up and join that one, please do, because I think they're going to give a demo and show you how to configure it and use it. For this session, I'll just go big here. We just thought maybe let's first just talk about what the kind of key challenges that you face in terms of building your project management capability. Look at the kind of how do you go from we've got loads of knowledge to actually how do we translate that into an actual capability. Third point we thought was, well, how's it all going to change in the future? Just have an open discussion about how do we see the kind of project management capability developing for the future. And also just look at some of the kind of common challenges that we face in terms of like a discussion around the key challenges you face in building capability, but also then just time at the end just to kind of reflect on any sort of questions that you guys have got. So if you're new to Livestorm, you'll see you have the kind of right-hand side panel. So if you want to ask questions, you can fill in the questions. If you want to chat and interact, you can just use the chat channel as well. We are going to do a quick poll, so I'll just bring that up now. So we just thought it would be good for, if you want, please participate, just to understand, and it can be from your perspective. I think you can select multiple options. So it's just going to appear in the poll option and just fill it in while we're talking. So we want to understand what are the kind of key challenges you face with your project management capability. And we've put some options out there. So is it kind of process, i.e. inconsistent or unclear ways of working? Is it kind of people related, i.e. skills, engagement, kind of culture? Is it training related, i.e. people have got the knowledge, but it's not translating into practice? Tools and data, too many, or just duplicated systems, or you don't have access to the data and information you need. And then there was the governance option, in terms of, are we consistent in terms of how we govern and assure projects, or is it a kind of a leadership challenge that we face in terms of direction, sponsorship? We were at the APM London event last night, which was a great talk from Muriel about sponsorship. So that was quite pertinent to that point as well. So Tom, I think if we just want to post that poll, and then you just can make your vote, and then at the session at the end when we look at key challenges, we'll feed the results into that. Cool. Let me go back. So I suppose, Human, I think the key bit is from a project capability perspective, what's the kind of APM's kind of perspective on building your project management capability?
I think thank you, Pip. It's a question that we grapple with almost daily, given what we do. You know, we are fundamentally about training, which of course relates to capability. A term that we often use though at APM is around this idea that application is far more difficult to achieve than acquisition. You know, it's a far more difficult thing to take what you've learned and then to apply it in your everyday. And I think it's important really as a starting point just to come back to what the fundamental differences are between those two things, because often when we talk about training, what we are referring to are those sort of isolated learning events, which is about delivering knowledge or a specific skill set in a single blow, if you like. Capability building is probably a little bit more complicated than that, in that it's a strategic process. It involves buy-in from across an organization. One of the examples, and I won't take credit for this because I think it's a really good one, but one of my colleagues often talks about capabilities as being the operating system, training is the update. And so what that fundamentally means is there's a lot more investment of time and effort into that capability building process that's needed. And as I say, because it's a bit more of a trickier thing to achieve, sometimes it's the case that we'll look at that isolated training and think of it as being the issue, when in actual fact we need to have probably a better process around capability building too.
Yeah, I think I used to have this. I think it's common used quite commonly. Is I've sent everyone on like my Prince 2 training, or I've sent them on my training. Yet when they come back, they haven't. It hasn't improved or shifted the dial. And I think the reality is, okay, well, you've trained them in the kind of core competencies and the skill sets, but then when they come back to the ranch, they then have to try and work out how they apply that. And normally, if there isn't we haven't thought about the core building blocks for the capability, like standard like process ways of working, standard governance, standards, all the standards and controls, the leadership that support it. That training is going to be very difficult for them to actually work out and translate and apply into practice.
Yeah, and that's why the environment is so important, right? You know, we need leadership to almost generate that culture of learning, and it's a term that we've often used, but psychological safety, right? The ability to be able to apply this training when they come back without fear of repercussion if things might sometimes go wrong. So building that culture of support, so people feel empowered to be able to come back and implement that training in their everyday. I think that there's also just a very fundamental thing needed here, and often we do see that this being missed off a little bit on the list, is giving people the time to be able to apply. You know, it's sometimes assumed that you've been trained, you're going to come back, you're going to be an expert in that thing, and you're off and running. When the reality is the individual or the individuals who have undergone that training actually just need that time to be able to apply. And again, being given that sort of support. The one other thing I would say, Pip, is having that sort of feedback loop is really important too. So having support from leadership and line management, and not just to come in and to critique that individual after they've attempted to sort of apply some of that training, but also there's a bit of knowledge sharing going on as well, right? So the individual comes back, implements the training, perhaps the more senior member of staff can then come in and provide additional support or training. That sort of micro learning is also important too.
Yeah, we were talking about it before. I think there's kind of, you can be trained in the discipline, but then you're working out how you then would translate it and apply it, and the application, whilst you've understood the theory of it, I think it's the human has to feel confident that they can apply it, and they're not going to be made to look like a fool, or they're not going to make a mistake, because essentially that's what's trying to protect them. And I think that's the shift in really building the capability in the individuals, is really giving them like you just talked about, that safe environment where they can start to apply it and learn through kind of application. Otherwise, I think it's just, well, I went on the course, I learned a bit, but actually I never really had the opportunity to work out how I would actually translate it. And there's probably a lot of learning that is kind of just lost or parked really through the lack of kind of a safe environment to apply it.
Yeah, completely agree, Pip. The one other thing I'd come back to as well is the training itself. And I would suggest that any trainer worth their salt will ensure that the training that they're delivering isn't just in the world of theory, right? Like there's going to be, you'd hope that there's going to be an element of practicality involved right the way throughout that training. So that is another thing to really consider when selecting the training and when you're looking to build that sort of that wider capability. Is to really understand whether the training is going to give the individual or the individuals some practical know-how whilst they're sat in a classroom, so they feel that comfort when they're back in the office as well.
Yeah, and I think I think there's a difference that when you frame the kind of professional development that's required for individuals, there's the kind of industry level kind of discipline knowledge that you want. So yeah, the frameworks they need to understand, all the disciplines, so kind of APM, the chartership, that type of training. But there's also then when they're in the organization, you have your way of working. You will have translated, and actually we're kind of REBA, we have our REBA based project life cycle, we're kind of, this is our life cycle, this is our way. And I think you have to have both. You have to have, look, we will support your professional development and your certifications to support your career path, but actually what we have to recognize is that when you come into our organization, you have to learn our way in how we do things. Yes, we might have based our learning and theory about how we do risk management, schedule and planning off best practice, but there is a transition, and I think this is the bit some organizations haven't got, is when you land, we will train you in our way. And there's a kind of, it's all based off best practice, you can't not do that, but essentially it's a kind of veneer that says, well, actually this is how we want you to apply it. And I think when you don't have that, I think that is quite difficult. And if you don't have your kind of way trained, your way can be then easily brushed aside, and it can be just my way, and I'm going to do it my way, and people are going to have to learn from me or the individual that's running the project, rather than actually, okay, well, actually we've codified it, how we're actually going to educate people in executing our delivery approach.
Yeah, I completely agree, Pip. And that talks very clearly to that need of creating a culture of learning within an organization. And there's some really good examples out there. The one that we often talk about is GLIDS. GLIDS, if you're not aware, a property and construction consultancy. And GLIDS are looking to upskill most of their staff, as most of us are now in AI. And they've very much taken the approach that you've outlined, Pip. There's something in their portfolio of sort of learning available to their staff for absolutely everyone. They've taken account of everyone's needs, everyone's time constraints. And this is publicly available if you're ever interested. That we did a blog on it on the APM website. Happy to share the link on that one. But they have everything from sort of casual drop-in lunch sessions, right the way through to one-day data literacy courses, right the way through to a structured A-level program. So they've really put the effort into it, as I'm sure many of our participants today will be within their organisations. But it does talk to that point, Pip, as you've quite rightly highlighted, that culture of capability. It's a real investment, and it is absolutely necessary. But we're seeing the organisations who are investing in this space are really reaping the rewards.
Yeah, I think it, like the capability building is a mindset. We were talking about before the call. Sometimes if you were like, oh, we need to improve our capability, and we would do like what they call it, like a capability uplift project, like a transactional project to fix our delivery capability. I think the reality is, like, capability building and maintain that is a pursuit rather than just a kind of one-off. It's the constant kind of grit, determination that you have to find in yourself, but also find the right people that have that determination. I think a really great interview question we ask at Method Grid is, when we ask people to say, look, give us an example of where you've genuinely built capability before. And the reason we ask that question is, well, we're trying to find out the people that have gone from, oh, well, I created a new template for X, Y, and Z, you know, and upload it on a SharePoint site, to the flip side of the best answer, which is, yeah, well, I built this template and then put it out on the SharePoint, and then I spent the rest of my time or a lot of my energy coaching and sharing it with people, going across to different regions to kind of get their feedback in and making it different. And then we improved it and then we iterated it. And it's kind of that, when you look at people, it's kind of, that's the determination and grit that you need to help you build your project management capability. There isn't, I don't think there will ever be just one big successful project that did it all. It's about, okay, how do we get the culture, the mindset, and the right people focused on how you're actually going to drive improvements in your delivery capability.
Yeah, absolutely, Pip. And that term mindset is so central to all of this. You know, one of the reasons we're even talking about capability is because, you know, let's be frank, we're all operating in incredibly dynamic environments at the moment. There's a heck of a lot of change happening. And that's why capability building is as important as it is. Well, the mindset that is needed in this incredibly dynamic environment is that things are going to change. And therefore capabilities are, you know, there's almost a need for dynamic capability building. You know, being quick on your feet, being, dare I say, agile and iterative, understanding where the needs are, understanding what our staff need from us as well when it comes to training and that capability building. Yep. That can't happen with that sort of, without the correct mindset. And the mindset enables us to be dynamic, I think.
Yeah, I think the one, I'll move on a little slide, there's a little picture to help us. The way, and I found this, obviously, Method Grid, it kind of works for in the project world. That's kind of the core use case for our platform. And this really helps us in terms of when we look at organizations, we're kind of like, well, are they kind of a large project factory? And when we think about project factories, I'm like, you know, think about like Network Rail, SSE, like the core part of how they deliver value is normally executed through the project lifecycle. They build offshore wind assets, they kind of transform the rail infrastructure and network. It's essentially, but what they're doing is they're constantly executing projects, but projects are key part of the value chain. That normally, I'll come on to it. That normally is probably, you know, when organizations realize that, you know, projects are the key way that they generate value, they're normally quite well disciplined and they'll invest in the capability and the kind of ways of working on that. But they also then have this, we call it kind of the internal factory, which is, okay, well, we still need to improve, we still need to transform, we still need like the internal changes of new technology, new ways of working, that's kind of driving internal change to keep the organization, make it, you know, relevant and keep it up to date. And I think the surprise I've found is actually, you'd be amazed that some of these organizations that are, you know, projects are the key way they add value. When they look at how they deliver internal projects and change, that the capability is far different in terms of, they really struggle in terms of landing like the big changes. And I think that just recognizes the kind of like the diversity that's required. When I look at an organization, I'm trying to work out, okay, how many project factories does it have? Okay, great. The way it makes money is through, let's say, like capital project delivery. That's key. Then it has like an internal like change capability, and then normally there's kind of an IT project factory that's in a bit of confusion, trying to work out, well, we're trying to be agile and we've got all of this BAU stuff that we have to do as well. And I think that really helps, because then when I look at it, I can say, okay, well, how does each factory perform? And when you ask questions to people about their capability, you can, especially some of the larger organizations, you're really trying to drill down, like where does variation exist for you? And I think leadership plays a key role in this, but it can either be a game of region wars. You know, our London office does projects this way, but our, you know, west or southwest does it this way. You know, and basically what we have is completely different. You know, the ways of working are different. The templates that they use, the competencies that they want to use is completely different. And what we've got as an organization is we've got basically region wars, or it kind of gets a bit further up and it's kind of divisions, lines of business. So, you know, it's like, this is how we've put silos in the organization, and the way that we deliver, I don't know, defense projects is completely different to how we do projects in other sectors broadly, because that's how we cut the organization up into different slices. So I think it is important, like, who owns the capability, or who's responsible for what project factory is how I determine it, because where you put that role will normally determine where the variation will start to exist. If you say it's a regional responsibility, you're going to have different ways of working and different approaches. That's a given. If you set it at a kind of line of business level, you're going to suffer it there. And if you set it at a group level, it sounds great, but then that group person is constantly fighting a very difficult story about why each division is different, or each region is different, and why their case needs to be different. I think the key I've learned is that whilst we always used to, I think maybe 15 years ago, we would say, oh, look, there's one way of doing things. I think the reality is what we've experienced, and why we crafted Method Grid, was there isn't one way of doing something. I think what organizations need is, actually, there are different scenarios our teams face in project delivery, and some of those we think we can make patterns for, and actually some of them are repeatable, some of them are way off, we would never do it, but this is how we would do, like, construction, this is how we do capital project delivery, this is how we do IT, this is how we do IT waterfall, this is how we do IT agile. There are, you know, maybe this is how we do renewals, is another good example, like a particular type of project that we repeat on a consistent basis. But I think the need to say, well, actually, there isn't just one way that we're trying and force people to try and follow. What we recognize is actually the kind of ways of working are much more diverse to the challenges that teams actually face. And I think this is where ways of working are becoming more dynamic, or more adapted to the kind of scenarios that people face.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you've just said there, Pip. And I have to say, I'm going to have to borrow your project factories analogy. It's brilliant. It's very, very, very good indeed. I completely agree. And I have to say, I think it's, you know, from everything that we're seeing from our membership and that we're seeing from our corporate partners, what you've described there is actually where the profession is going itself. You know, we're talking a lot about hybrid methodology. You only have to look at the likes of NISTA, formerly Infrastructure Projects Authority. You know, you look at their portfolio, it's broad and it's diverse, as you describe it. But what NISTA, for example, will be doing, as well as some of those other larger organizations, is they will sort of follow a set of common principles. And where there will be variation is at that sort of project level, but almost at that portfolio level, you'll have that set of common principles. And so where the sort of the individual projects will vary in scope and in context, there's always that sort of that guiding, that fundamental principle that's running through every one of those projects. And I think that in itself is important. But I do come back to the point that you've quite rightly highlighted. The profession is absolutely moving in this direction, probably has been for some time. This idea that you know, we're operating in very much a hybrid world now. And why? Well, because there is a need to. The environment is as dynamic as it is. The change is happening as quickly as it is. There is a need for agility and iteration, sometimes in the same project. So completely agree, Pip. I think it is the way that things are going, and we're certainly seeing this increasingly amongst membership and certainly within our corporate partners as well.
Yeah, I think I'll move on. I think the bit we kind of probably call out in terms of the capability, and it is a bit of a frustration, I think, for most of the practitioners in their organization, is I think when you think about like ways of working, or the process that you want people to follow in terms of how they deliver projects, is we have a very simple phrase that you always want to ensure that ways of working are kind of clearly articulated, universally understood, consistently followed. But I think this the reality for a lot of organizations, for a lot of people working in organizations, is it doesn't exist. It's easily ignored. I didn't even know it existed. You know, it's incoherent. And what I mean by incoherent is, like, project delivery isn't just like the PMO or the project managers. It's all of the other functions that have to be involved, that have to be kind of ordered to deliver the outcome. It's kind of like, we take capital project delivery. It's going to be, yes, project managers. It's going to be like design, engineering. It's going to be health and safety. There'll be other functions that have to be kind of coordinated and integrated, but they have to be, the ways of working have to be universally understood as you go through left to right. If you take the IT use case, it's okay, great, we've got project managers and PMO, they're happy ways of working, but you'll have like the solution architects, you'll have development, testing, you'll have service acceptance, like all of those other functions need to do it. So when we talk about universally understood, it's not just that, okay, I know what the project management process is, it's I know how that project management approach actually works across all of the functions and how we're going to navigate through left to right. But I think what we find in reality is it's just a constant frustration. I mean, I talked about variation at region. I think for some it'll be, look, we vary project to project. You know, even when we're in the same kind of line of business, the way they do something, you know, not my project's okay, but that project over there, that's terrible. And I think what the reality is, that is a constant frustration for teams. And normally that frustration leads to kind of anger. It's like, well, why haven't you made my life a bit easier? And I think a lot of the excuses or well, we've written it all down, but it exists in, you know, it's 100, you know, it's in that standard, and you have to go and read that PDF over there, and someone else has just published this bit of information over here. So why didn't you go and read it? And why, you know, what's the other phrase we get from leaders is, you know, leader will just stand up and go, why don't the teams follow the process? And I'm like, well, probably because they don't know it exists. They can't find it. Even when they think they found it, someone knocks them on the shoulder and says, oh, by the way, that changed a couple of months ago. Didn't you see the email? It's kind of like, oh, well, you know, that is the kind of constant kind of frustration that I think teams feel. And that really, I'd probably say, like, ways of working and the clarity on the process and following it is key to your kind of building your capability. But if it's all kind of difficult for them to understand, or the burden of finding out how you want them to do it is always placed on the individual, never really on you, the company, have got to work out how we make it easier for them.
Yeah, absolutely, Pip. And I'm keen to get your view on this. It's certainly something that comes up quite a lot. And the term that we sometimes hear is around knowledge transfer, and something that some are reporting as having become even more difficult in recent times because of retention and the fact that retention has become a bit more of an issue as well. And so where that knowledge transfer isn't happening simply because the communication channels aren't there, or the lines aren't there, or that knowledge transfer just doesn't happen organically in the way that it might. When you're losing staff, or if there is a turnover, or you're just losing key members of a team with whom that knowledge often sits, and you know, this information will naturally sit somewhere centrally, but if it's not being deliberately transferred, that can make the situation I think you've described as being quite difficult. So the thing that we do hear sometimes, Pip, is this is an issue that's become a little bit more difficult of late, just where organisations have, in some cases, struggled to keep hold of staff, or there's been high turnover.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a vicious circle, really. I think like project delivery is quite stressful. It's a stressful environment, really, anyway. But if you're trying to deliver projects or deliver your project, but also at the same time you're trying to figure out like how we're actually going to do it, i.e. the kind of putting all the process controls and governance, and you're building that from scratch, that's another kind of challenge on top of that. I think, you know, I would look at it in those environments where you haven't really put much in place to help people, you're going to suffer high churn. You know, it's not a pleasant environment to be in, and they'll try and make it, you know, they'll make kind of some improvement, but they'll just get frustrated, and, you know, they'll go and seek elsewhere. So I think you have to watch out for that, because if you don't kind of help people codify ways of working and make it easier for them for their day job, that will inherently increase your churn. Churn is inevitable though, and I think the way I look at it is people are going to come in and people are going to leave, and I'm in that, you're in that constant cycle. That's just the reality you face. But when you're faced with that reality is when you look at where everything is in terms of, well, when they join, how easy is it for them to understand and get up to speed, and where's all the information they need to help them successfully deliver kind of our way. And if that's kind of scattered across different SharePoints, different PDFs, you know, they have to kind of build this mental picture in their head and work out, okay, well, this is a steep learning curve for me, and it's not all written down. Sometimes I have to figure out who the right people are to speak to, but that's trial and error. Like, I thought I was speaking to the right person, found out that that wasn't the right person, it's this person over here. But that took me about 3 or 4 days to find out. And I think that's the bit where if you don't spend time codifying ways of working in the knowledge, and you don't make it easier to support that kind of constant transition flow that you're going to naturally go through, and the worst case is, you know, somebody left and it was all in their head and we're completely now in a massive reset position. We're not sure, we're going to have to rebuild from scratch. That's the worst case. But I think I think you have to look at the situation and then work out as yourself, look at it, am I safe? Am I doing the right things that are making the knowledge transfer, you know, easy for people to access and follow? And I think that's the other bit as well about, okay, well, how do we work on, you talked about before, is it's simple things like lunch and learns, or, you know, constant kind of repeating, okay, well, actually, look, guys, we're going to do a focus session just about risk management, and here's our process, this is how we want you to do it. And, you know, you have somebody nominated as the kind of person responsible for that kind of discipline that people can go to and interact and navigate with and talk to. But you get into the mindset that, look, your teams aren't the same teams that you had 6 months ago, 12 months ago. So there's no harm in constantly getting into a cycle of going, oh, look, we're going to do a quick lunch and learn on stakeholder management. This is what we learned. Or we've done these projects over the last 6 months. They're coming to the end. We're bringing everyone together, and actually we're going to talk about those projects and share some of the things that we've learned. Whilst we want to kind of codify those lessons and have them recorded, and so that other teams can use it and will influence ways of working, I think there is just the kind of natural bit was, well, teams are actually people are quite interested into learning the story and listening to the story face to face. So I think there's that community of practice element, and it's the kind of the softer side of things as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, Pip. It's interesting. I was reflecting whilst you were speaking there. What you've in essence described is the capability building process, right? It is about mindset. It's about ensuring that there's someone there identifying the gaps and doing that dynamically and regularly and all the time. So that in itself is a capability, right? And it's really interesting. I was reflecting then about a study that I saw recently, and it was conducted by our colleagues at the PMI. And there was a, not wishing to get ahead of the poll that's going on at the moment, but one of the challenges that was identified within that study, I'm just bringing it up in front of me now, relationship building. Relationship building is seen as a key competency that's lacking within the project management profession, and that's as reported by project professionals. And I think that's just a really interesting point, and a reflection I had just as you were speaking there, which is what you've described as a capability, and we need to ensure that that capability is sound and exists, and again feeds into this entire culture of learning and capability building.
I mean, I think I've cracked this joke before. I think when we talk about consistent ways of working, I think when they don't exist, people will complain. Like, people will get angry and frustrated that they exist, that they don't exist. You know, oh, I used to work in this organization, we used to have all this written down, you know, you don't, you know, and it's really difficult, it's making my life structured. And then you flip it and go, well, actually we have written it down, we kind of got it codified and it's written down. It's like, oh, I don't want to use, I can't use that, I can't kind of adapt it, I can't use that on my project, I can't tailor it, I can't adjust it, and I can't right size it. And And that's the constant, I think, the battle you have to imagine. That's the kind of human machine angle, which is, look, humans are, we are like natural problem solvers, really creative people, especially the people that you kind of work in projects. They love solving problems. And if you try and codify ways of working and make it really rigid, I think that's not really going to allow the individual to anchor themselves to your way of working. And that's what you want. You want them to be able to anchor themselves to, this is great, I can use this. And I think the key, what we've learned, especially, is your ability to, even though you've maybe, Dom does a really good talk on this, you've given them 80% of what they're going to need. Like a risk register is a risk register. You're going to need a PMP at stage 1 or stage 2. That's just boilerplate. They're the kind of standard things. You can't really change that, but we've codified that and made it easier for you to follow. The 20%, what we want you to bring is actually, well, look, how do you think we should do this? Are there additional deliverables, or do we need to move this and adjust this and right size this? Clients put their hand up and says, well, we can't do that here. We need to do this over here. So we need to listen and reflect. And I think that's the bit where what we found is, look, you can't dynamically change that in a PDF or in a SharePoint site. And I think when you want to tailor your way of working to fit the scenario that the teams are facing, the other challenge is you have to communicate it. And I think that's when you want to communicate ways of working, or the way that you've translated your way of working for that project, unless you can kind of clearly articulate and work together as a team or with the client or with the different stakeholders on visually saying, like, I think that's how we're going to do it. And that's when we're going to do X, that's when we're going to do Y, that's when we'll be ready for gate A or gate B. Unless you can do that, I think it's very difficult for humans to like the team to actually anchor that and try and even coherently deliver it. If it's always in people's heads and they're like, oh, I'm not sure, I can't remember what session we had, or that meeting, I think we said we were going to do X and we were going to do Y. So I think the ability for you to visualize like the end to end, but also be transparent to everyone about how you've translated it for each project, I think is critical in kind of the modern delivery. I think on the kind of modern delivery bit, I think we said we'd talk about it, but how do we see the kind of future kind of capability building in the kind of next 5 years taking shape?
Yeah, I think it comes back, Pip, and you took the words right out of my mouth there. Actually, technology naturally comes to mind, and in answer to your question, where is the profession going? Where does capability building sit within that? Well, I think it's going to be reflective of the environment as it is now and is likely to continue. We're already aware that things are happening quickly, sped up by lots of different things, including global events, right the way through to change and uncertainty in the political environment, right the way through to the digital world that we live in. What that fundamentally means is capability building will also change. And I come back to that point earlier on about the ability to dynamically build capability. I think that's going to be really, really crucial. Let's bring it back to digital just for a moment, and what we're seeing and what we're hearing from our membership and from our corporate partners, that the one thing that really comes up when we're talking about particularly data, AI, automation, is that form of technology has enabled us to almost commoditize a certain skill set. And what that ultimately means is that there are certain skills that I hasten to use the word obsolete because I don't think we're at that point just yet, but there are certain skill sets which are being handed to AI and automation. What does that mean for capability building? Well, it means that actually, as humans, we will likely be looking towards building more human capability. And some of the things that I've talked about earlier on when I mentioned that survey done by the PMI, the capabilities that were listed as being or as lacking today are those most human of capabilities. When it comes to the ability to communicate, the ability to make quality decisions using the information at our disposal, Those are the capabilities that will come far more sharply in focus. And we're absolutely seeing this today as well. I think the other thing to talk about, and there are some very specific things that sort of come up when we're discussing this with our corporate partners, is the role of the PMO, and whether it's going to take more of a strategic form than compared to where it is today. But certainly that human capability is the thing that's coming up time and again.
Yeah, I think I mean, from my perspective, what I probably when I worked for Capita and did Capita's kind of evolve methodology framework, and when we, as part of that, we built like an academy. The cost of and probably effort of building kind of e-learning, like videos, building the academy, that was a significant investment, and I'm not sure everyone would you can't, it's probably out of reach for some organizations to make that level of investment that's required. What I've seen, especially over the last 12 months, is the application of AI in e-learning platforms, video platforms that learn, like building video explainers to explain things to people is now, instead of we need to bring everyone into a room and get the cameras out and try and film them, and we're on take 15, and we're trying to get it right. Now it's it's very simple as, look, okay, actually the way that we can build learning and the way that we can build our kind of way training, that now is significantly cheaper and within the reach of the business users, not specialist people. So we've built e-learning courses in about 3 or 4 days. When we build video explainers in a couple of hours, it's kind of, well, that's unheard of in terms of how you might build and deploy training to individuals. But I think the other one that we're kind of preparing for, you saw that we've just launched kind of source grounding, so that you can source ground and dynamically that'll help you build a playbook. I think the other testing that we're sort of exploring is, okay, well, I'm explaining to AI about what my project is, and it's got all the standards and access to all the information, and I'm saying, look, it's in this location, it's this type of environment, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and these type of changes. And AI is basically going away, looking at all the standards and coming back and say, well, actually, you need to run that through this project risk classification, therefore your 4 stages, I've built that dynamically for you. You can't do it as a 2-gate process, it has to be a 3 gates. And by the way, you're doing this project in Scotland and you need to work with the kind of Scottish Fisheries Agency, but I've dynamically basically built your way of working to help you execute it and visualize it. And I think that's what we're kind of exploring. Once we've got through source grounding, there's a few other things that we're trying to build. I think the way of working in the future, like 5 years, will be much more dynamic, and it won't be that we have a sort of process map of how we're doing things. I think that process map, or how we're going to visualize how people deliver projects, is more going to be dynamically driven and supported and produced by AI. But I think that it'll be the human that is narrating that conversation, but really AI is then going away and going, oh, by the way, look at these lessons from similar projects that operated in that area or operated in that region, or I've gone away and look at existing site information that was done a couple of years ago. You need to be kind of aware of that. And I think that what we probably have to prepare ourselves for is the amount of information that AI is going to be able to consume and present to us, but then help us in terms of making work much more dynamic and tailored to the scenarios that teams are facing. I think that's hopefully probably in the next maybe 24 months, I think that's what we're going to hopefully start to see, that our ways of working become much more dynamic. I do agree, though. I think in terms of the PMO conversation, I think a lot of the things, like of project admin, and some of the controls that we expect PMO to do, like, is your risk register up to date? Have you got, are there any risks past their due date? Have you got mitigation actions? I think all of the kind of quality check and improvement, AI is going to, I think, help teams get it right first time. So what we should see is probably actually our first line of defense gets it right much better, and actually we don't see too much pressure or too much need or for second line and third line defense on the kind of checks and controls, because we're so good at getting it right first time. So I think it's not a shift of replacing, I think it's a shift of changing our confidence in the kind of controls in the framework. But I do agree, I think PMO moves much more into kind of the strategic, okay, well, what projects are we doing, balancing off the priorities to help us make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely, Pip. It's interesting actually, because the profession, just bringing it back to the fundamentals around the usage of AI, the profession is a bit of a front runner, I have to say. We run these sort of pulse surveys, and the vast majority of project professionals, who, by the way, within our membership, we have the complete array. People who are starting out right the way through to the most senior people within the profession. The vast majority are using AI in some way or other. The very interesting pattern, or rather the interesting trend that we've noticed, and this relates also to capability, is the way that AI is being used to measure impact. And I think that's really relevant to the capability building piece as well, because what we've typically done in the past is we've measured capability and often skills by just the number of people we've sent off on training courses. And what's a bit more tricky to do is actually to measure the impact of what then happens once that person is considered capable. And what we are seeing increasingly is the use of AI in that space too. So it's interesting that, yes, it's about being more efficient in the way that we run our projects, but it's also being used to check our capability as well.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's move on. The next comment was just a kind of reflection on the kind of key challenges. So I'm kind of looking at the kind of polls. I'll make this big for a second. So I said, look, I think when it comes to building your capability, I think the process variation challenge is always there. And I think it's about looking at what techniques can we apply to kind of reduce the level of variation and degree that we've got. And I think it's a really good mindset to have with this is trying to work on what variation creates value versus doesn't create value. I can't really generate much value in having a different risk register. A kind of risk register is a risk register, but I can add significantly more value in looking at how we optimize the approach, the solutions that we consider. That's where my focus should be, not just doing the boilerplate. Look, why am I adding variation just for the sake of making it feel like I've made it mine? I think that's kind of the key bit in terms of how you focus variation. And what did you see? Yeah, that's we thought it would be like process inconsistent or unclear ways of working is the top. Machinery, tools, different platforms, systems can't access the data. Again, I think that's becoming more and more challenging, I think, for people in the profession. And then there's the kind of people capability is, and I think that's always, we talked about at the start. Fundamentally, it's about ensuring that people have the confidence to give it a go. And if they don't feel confident, they will default to what they know. And that default certainly won't be your way of working. And I think that's the bit where you want to give, through training, through kind of regular lunch and learns, through mentoring and coaching and supporting. One thing I just look at it is like, how am I going to build confidence in that individual that they can step up and give it a go? And yeah, that kind of psychological safety, I think, is also important. You've got to be really careful how you damage people's self-esteem, confidence. You kind of have to it's not wrapping them up in cotton wool, but there are kind of direct conversations you have to have with them. But you've got to kind of build their confidence and self-esteem. Otherwise, they're going to kind of feel like they can't step out of their shell and give it a go. And then the governance. I thought governance would be a bit higher. I normally find kind of governance, ownership. One of the kind of frustrations that people have is, we're not consistent. We say we have gateways, but we don't apply them. They're inconsistently followed. We don't we have sponsors, but they don't really know their role. I thought that was kind of the conversation that came up at London's network yesterday. Cool. I think that, that brings a kind of close to sort of the kind of topics and conversation. Anything, Huon, you want to talk about the challenges?
I'm reflecting on what you mentioned there about people capability. It's always so useful, and I think this is one of the benefits that we have because we are able to see what people are doing. You know, that for us is that for me is the big value that we can provide to the profession, and genuinely never short of inspiration when you see what organizations are doing out there. And I thought it might just be useful on the point about people capability to share something that TfL are doing, which I think is really relevant to this. And it comes back to the point about training and give psychological safety and giving people the space and the safety to be able to make mistakes if they need to. Something that I think TfL does, which is very interesting, is that experiential point, enabling or allowing members of staff, no matter where they sit within the organization, to go off and visit other parts of the organization and to sit within that organization, to sit with those teams, to soak up whatever knowledge they can. That can be to do with training, or it can just be, you know, as simple as a bit of shadowing, but often reported as some of the most powerful things that we can do to build capability. So yeah, coming back to that people capability point, the experience and the exposure to it within our own organizations, I think is as powerful. Yeah,
I think the probably one of my old bosses described it to me. I think as a leader, what you kind of have to learn is you become like a shepherd, and you have like a sheep hook, and you're just trying to, if you just need to rein it in just before they kind of fall off a cliff. That's literally the kind of the phrase you used to use, and it's a really good way of just what, as a leader, kind of how you kind of have to try to just give people the room to kind of explore and grow, and then at some point you just need to just hook them back in and just kind of save them from their own mistakes. I think is the critical challenge.
I'm going to go off and buy myself a shepherd's hook now.
Time for questions. I'll just flip it over and see if we've got any questions. Question from Nigel: is there an inherent inefficiency working across multiple factories? Surely factories are created to be fine-tuned to seconds. I think, Nigel, I think that's I don't think there's inefficiency. I think it's facing the reality that like some factory, like if you take the factory analogy, some factories like produce capital projects. I want a factory that will do renewals. I maybe want a factory that will do IT changes that we need to make and deliver applications. When I think about it in that, and so I just then can look at it very clearly and go, okay, well, what process, ways of working, that training that's relevant, what skill sets are relevant to actually make that. I don't think they exist as a kind of core thing within the business, but it's a mindset that you says, okay, actually, how am I going to make this kind of IT like project factory work more efficiently? And it will be, okay, what's the ways of working? Are they clearly articulated? Have we got the right people, the right skill sets? Are we training people in our way of understanding how that works? Have we squared off, you know, how projects work and how solution architecture works, and just making sure that that is coherent across all the different functions involved? But that's a completely different conversation when I'm then sort of saying, well, let's have a conversation about the capital project delivery arm of the business and how we do capital projects. Again, I'm thinking through the same analogy. So it's more of a helpful way of trying to process the thinking. Hopefully that's helpful. And maybe I'd probably trade off, if there is inefficiencies, I'd probably trade them off and say, I think some of those inefficiencies are probably better to have than trying to force people down and trying to force them into kind of one way of working or one framework. That I think that natural reaction is they'll just step away. They'll step away from it, and then you might not be as inefficient, but then you've got people that just don't really want to follow it and can't use it. And I think that's a bigger challenge that you face.
Cool. I was just having a quick scroll through the comments and the chat, and Rab Mulholland, who sounds like he's having a whale of a time in the Brecon Beacons, has made a comment about the project factories, and he's written, "This gets me thinking of projects as a supply chain and project delivery, production, moving through that chain of factories, increasing value as they go." And then Rab's promised to wander on this as he wanders the Brecons, which is brilliant. but I thought an interesting comment on the topic.
Yeah. Cool. So look, I think we're coming close to the end. Just at the last point, just thank you for your time, and thank you for kind of attending this month's Grid Talk. I've just put it up there, kind of, if any of the resources, I mean, there's a couple of resources that we produced. There's the kind of process to playbook white paper, and the other one is building world-class. Let me bring it up. The other one is building world-class project delivery methods and playbooks, and they are all kind of focused on some of the challenges that teams have with ways of working, but more built on kind of why humans find it difficult. So if you're struggling with ways of working, I definitely recommend reading Process to Playbook. And then I think if the more broader thinking about how you build capability, building world-class project delivery methods and playbooks is a really good resource, because rather than just talking about how you build playbooks, it also talks about some of the key foundations that you need to put in place in order to make that playbook successful. So that'll talk about governance, training, how you build competencies in people as well. So that's a really good resource. But from me, massive thank you for attending, and hopefully, I'll see you all in October's session. But thank you very much for joining. Take care and see you next month.